The moment my father stood up at Christmas dinner, champagne glass raised, I knew something terrible was coming. But I never imagined he'd say the words that would destroy our family forever. "Brooke has never contributed anything to this family," he announced, his voice echoing across the silent table. 20 relatives stared at their plates. "That's why I'm giving the entire company, all $86 million, to Madison. She deserves it." My sister smirked. My father looked triumphant. And me, I just smiled. Because here's what nobody at that table knew: I didn't just contribute to our family company. I built it. 10 years ago, when my father's gambling addiction and terrible decisions had pushed us to the edge of bankruptcy, I was the one who secretly invested $12 million to save it. I was the one who restructured everything, brought in new clients, turned us profitable. I did it all from the shadows, while he took the credit and my sister took the praise. And now he was handing my empire to the golden child who'd never worked a real day in her life. So I stood up, set down my wine glass, and walked out without saying a single word. 1 month later, I got the call I'd been waiting for. The company was collapsing. My sister had made a catastrophic mistake. My father's dark secrets were finally surfacing, and suddenly they needed me. But this time, I wasn't coming back to save them. I was coming back to take everything. What happened next shocked my entire family and exposed truths that would change all our lives forever. This is the story of how the daughter they called useless became the woman who owned it all. And trust me, you won't believe how this ends. My name is Brooke Howard. I'm 38 years old, and for the last 15 years, I've built a consulting empire that most people in Atlanta's business circles would recognize if they knew it was mine. But I've spent most of my life being invisible, so why would now be any different? Sitting at my father's Christmas dinner table that evening, watching the candlelight flicker across faces I'd known my entire life, I felt that familiar weight settle over my shoulders. The weight of being the daughter no one truly saw. I'd driven 3 hours from my downtown loft to be here to this sprawling house in the suburbs where I'd grown up, feeling like a guest in my own home. Every year, I told myself this would be the last time. Every year, I came back anyway, carrying some foolish hope that this might be the Christmas my father would finally look at me and see something worth acknowledging. I should have known better by 38. Some lessons take longer to learn than others. Growing up as the eldest daughter in the Howard household meant being the help, not the heir. While my younger sister Madison took piano lessons and dance classes, I was the one scrubbing dishes and folding laundry. When Madison complained about her homework being too hard, I was the one who helped her through it after finishing my own. When our parents needed someone to pick up extra shifts at their struggling manufacturing company, someone to answer phones or file paperwork without pay, it was always me they called, never Madison. She was too precious, too delicate, too destined for better things. "Brooke's just naturally responsible," my mother used to say, as if being reliable was some sort of consolation prize for being overlooked. My father Richard's opinion was simpler. I heard him tell his brother once, when he thought I wasn't listening, that I was the one who never amounted to anything. I was 16 years old. I'd just gotten straight A's and been accepted to Georgia Tech on a partial scholarship. But in his eyes, I was already a disappointment, already less than the golden child who could do no wrong. So at 18, I left. No dramatic goodbye, no door-slamming scene. I just quietly packed my bags, moved into a tiny apartment with 3 roommates, and started working. I waited tables during breakfast shifts, did data entry at night, and took a full course load during the day. I survived on 4 hours of sleep and refused to ask my family for a single dollar. The few times I came home those first years, my father barely noticed I'd been gone. What he definitely didn't notice was that I was good at business, exceptionally good. By 25, I'd moved from data entry to financial analysis. By 30, I'd started my own consulting firm. By 33, I'd made my first $1 million. By 36, I'd built something extraordinary, a network of strategic investments and business holdings worth $86 million. And that was just my personal fortune. What I did for Howard Manufacturing was something else entirely. 10 years ago, my mother called me crying. The family company, the one my father had run with such arrogant confidence, was 3 weeks from bankruptcy. $8 million in debt, creditors, circling employees about to lose their jobs. My father was too proud to admit the failure, too stubborn to ask for help, and too foolish to fix it himself. But my mother begged me. She was the only one who'd ever really seen me, the only one who'd told me I was capable of anything I set my mind to. "Please, Brooke," she'd said. "I know you owe him nothing, but don't let everything collapse. Not for him, for the people who work there, for the legacy." So I did something my father would never have imagined I was capable of. I structured a rescue package through shell companies, invested $12 million of my own money, and hired the best restructuring team in the Southeast. I rebuilt Howard Manufacturing from the ground up, new systems, new clients, new strategies. Within 18 months, the company was profitable. Within 5 years, it was worth $86 million. My father took all the credit, of course. He told everyone how his business acumen and strategic vision had engineered the miraculous turnaround. Madison believed every word, bragging to her friends about her brilliant father. And I said nothing. I'd made a promise to my mother before she died 5 years ago. Never let this family destroy itself because of your father's pride. So I stayed silent, watching from the shadows, as the empire I'd built was celebrated as his achievement. But tonight, as I watched my father stand up at the head of that Christmas table, his face flushed from 3 glasses of whiskey, I felt something shift inside me. 20 relatives watched as he raised his glass with theatrical grandeur, his voice booming across the dining room, that my money had actually paid to renovate. "I have an announcement to make," Richard declared, and the conversations around the table died. "As you all know, Howard Manufacturing has become something truly special. $86 million of value, a testament to hard work, vision, and family loyalty." He paused, looking directly at me for the first time all evening. My heart foolishly still held some small hope. Then he smiled, turned to Madison, and shattered it completely. "That's why I've decided to give the entire company to Madison. It's a belated birthday gift, but more than that, it's what she deserves. She's been by my side, supporting this business, understanding what it takes to build something real." The air left the room. I watched my sister's face light up with triumph, her smile sharp and satisfied. Around the table, relatives suddenly found their wine glasses fascinating. No one met my eyes. Richard wasn't finished. He looked back at me, and there was something almost gleeful in his expression. "Brooke has never contributed anything to this family. She ran off at 18, barely comes around, never showed any interest in the company. Madison is the daughter who stayed, who cared, who deserves this legacy." For 38 years, I'd absorbed these moments. I'd learned to make myself small, to swallow the hurt, to keep the peace. But sitting there listening to my father credit my life's greatest achievement to my sister, while calling me worthless, something inside me finally broke free. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I didn't explain or defend, or beg to be seen. Instead, I felt my lips curve into a smile, the same smile my mother used to have when she'd finally had enough of something, when she'd made a decision that couldn't be unmade. Across the table, I saw my Aunt Carol's face go pale. "That's exactly the smile her mother had when she'd had enough," Carol whispered to her husband, but in the silence, everyone heard it. I stood up slowly, deliberately, every eye fixed on me. I picked up my wine glass, took one last sip, and set it down with perfect composure. "Thank you, Father," I said, my voice steady as steel. "You've just given me the greatest gift, my freedom." I walked toward the door, my heels clicking against the hardwood floor I'd refinished with my own money. Behind me, Richard's voice rose with confused anger. "Where do you think you're going?" I paused, my hand on the doorknob, and turned back one last time. That smile was still on my face, but now there was something else in my eyes, something my father had never seen before because he'd never bothered to look. "To fix the mess you've made," I said quietly. "Again." Then I walked out into the cold December night, leaving behind the family that had never wanted to see me. It was time they learned exactly who I was, and what I'd been all along. 3 days after I walked out of that Christmas dinner, I sat in my downtown Atlanta office on the 42nd floor, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a view my father couldn't even imagine. The city sprawled below me, glittering in the winter afternoon light. I'd spent those 3 days letting the anger settle, letting the clarity come. Now it was time to face the truth I'd been avoiding for 10 years. I pulled up the files I'd kept locked away in an encrypted folder labeled simply Cascade. Howard Manufacturing, the company my father thought he'd built through sheer force of will and business genius. I almost laughed at the irony as I scrolled through the documents. 10 years ago, when my mother called me crying about the impending bankruptcy, I'd done more than just write a check. Howard Manufacturing had been $8 million in debt 3 weeks from complete collapse. Creditors were calling daily. Employees were updating their resumes. My father was hiding in his office, paralyzed by pride and panic, so I'd created Cascade Holdings, LLC, a shell company that couldn't be traced back to me, and I'd offered him a lifeline, $12 million in emergency capital. What Richard never bothered to do was read the contract he signed. He'd been too desperate, too relieved to see those numbers in his account. If he'd spent even an hour with his lawyer reviewing the fine print, he would have discovered that he'd just handed me strategic decision-making rights of first refusal on any share purchases during times of crisis and veto power over major financial decisions. He'd signed away control while thinking he was simply accepting a generous investment from some faceless corporate entity. I'd hired the restructuring team. I'd implemented the new systems. I'd personally courted the clients that turned everything around. For 18 months, I'd worked 70-hour weeks behind the scenes, rebuilding that company from its foundation while maintaining my own consulting business. The $86 million valuation everyone celebrated as Richard's triumph. That was my architecture, my strategy, my vision. I'd kept it secret, not out of fear, but out of cold calculation. If Richard had known the truth, he would have taken credit anyway, and then expected me to keep solving his problems for free. If Madison had known, she would have resented me even more than she already did. And my mother's dying words had been clear: don't let your father's ego destroy what I helped build. So I'd stayed silent, watching from the shadows as my masterpiece was attributed to a man who'd nearly destroyed it. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. The caller ID showed a name I hadn't expected: Thomas Chen, my mother's longtime attorney. I answered immediately. "Ms. Howard, I need you to come to my office today if possible." Thomas said, his voice carrying an urgency that made my pulse quicken. "It's regarding your mother's final wishes. There's something she left for you with specific instructions about when it should be released." 2 hours later, I sat across from Thomas in his mahogany-paneled office as he slid a leather folder across his desk. Inside was a letter in my mother's elegant handwriting dated 2 weeks before her death 5 years ago. My hands trembled slightly as I began to read. "My dearest daughter, I always knew you were the strongest one. I didn't intervene because I wanted you to grow into your own power. But I also knew one day you would need resources to protect yourself from your father's weaknesses. Use this money not out of obligation, but out of love for yourself, for the legacy we built together. And if you choose for your sister who doesn't yet understand what strength means, you owe your father nothing, but you owe yourself everything." Thomas cleared his throat. "Your mother established a trust containing $30 million from her personal inheritance and retirement savings. She instructed me to monitor the family business and release the funds only when you faced a severe financial crisis related to protecting the family." He paused, his expression grave. "Recent financial irregularities at Howard Manufacturing have triggered that release condition. The money is yours, Ms. Howard." $30 million. My mother had known. She'd known what Richard was, what he was capable of, and she'd prepared for this moment. I felt tears prick my eyes for the first time since Christmas dinner. But Thomas's mention of financial irregularities sent a chill down my spine. I thanked him, took the trust documents, and drove straight back to my office. I still had backdoor access to Howard Manufacturing's financial systems from my original rescue operation, access Richard had never discovered. I logged in, and what I found made my blood run cold. $12 million withdrawn from company accounts over the past 4 months. I traced the transactions to Madison's authorization approved for something called the Gulf Breeze Development Project in Florida. A quick search of public records revealed the truth. The development site was landlocked, had no permits, and the developer company owned by one Marcus Webb had been registered only a year ago, Madison's boyfriend. The man I'd seen her posting about on social media, the charismatic entrepreneur who'd swept her off her feet 8 months ago. I called my private investigator, Maria Santos, and asked her to dig into Marcus Webb. Her response came within an hour. No digital footprint before 18 months ago, no prior business history, red flags everywhere. But that wasn't the worst of it. As I continued searching through the records, I noticed another pattern. Large cash withdrawals from Richard's personal accounts linked to offshore wire transfers, hundreds of thousands of dollars moving regularly to accounts in the Cayman Islands. Then my screen lit up with an automated alert from a credit monitoring service I'd set up years ago to keep tabs on the company's financial health. My hands froze over the keyboard as I read the notification. Howard Manufacturing's line of credit had been used as collateral for a $25 million personal loan in Richard's name. The lender wasn't a bank. It was Redstone Capital Partners, a hard money lender notorious for aggressive collection tactics and crippling interest rates. The repayment deadline 60 days from today. The collateral Richard's 30% ownership stake in the company and the family home. My father had gambled away everything, and he'd used my company as the stakes. My phone rang, shattering the silence of my office. The caller ID displayed Richard Howard, mobile. I stared at it, my finger hovering over the answer button. If I picked up, everything would change. The game would truly begin. The phone rang again, insistent, and again. I let the phone ring one more time before I answered. "Hello, Father. What the hell do you think you're doing?" Richard's voice was sharp with barely controlled panic. "I got a call from our bank asking about unusual account access. That was you, wasn't it? You have no right to meddle in family business." I kept my voice perfectly calm. "I have every right, but we can discuss that in person. I'll be there in an hour." "Brooke, I'm warning you." I hung up. My hands were steady as I gathered my laptop and the documents Thomas had given me. Whatever happened next, I was done being the invisible daughter who swallowed her words to keep the peace. When I arrived at the family home, Richard's car was gone. I found Madison instead curled up on her childhood bed, mascara streaked down her face, staring at her phone like it might come back to life through sheer force of will. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice hoarse. But there was no fight in it, just exhaustion. "I came to talk to Father, but maybe we should talk instead." I sat down in the chair by her desk, the same chair I'd sat in years ago helping her with homework. She was too privileged to finish on her own. "Tell me about Marcus." Her face crumpled. "He's gone. His phone number is disconnected. His social media accounts are deleted. I went to his apartment this morning and it was empty. The landlord said he moved out 2 days ago, paid through the end of the month in cash and disappeared." "The Florida Development Project," I said quietly. "Tell me about that." Madison's defenses flared briefly. "Father gave me the company. I can do what I want with the money. Marcus said it was a guaranteed return that we'd—" Her voice broke. "You already know, don't you? You know it was fake." I opened my laptop and showed her the public records. The landlocked property. The shell company registered barely a year ago. The complete absence of permits or legitimate development plans. Madison stared at the screen, her face draining of color. "He said he loved me," she whispered. "He said we'd build something together that I could prove I was more than just Daddy's little girl. He pushed me to make bold moves to show I had vision. The Florida project was his idea. He introduced me to the developers. He said if I didn't act fast, other investors would jump in." She looked up at me, and for the first time in our lives, I saw genuine remorse in her eyes. "I wanted Father to see me as smart and capable, the way he never saw you." The admission hung between us. Madison continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've always been the capable one. I was just too entitled to admit it. I'm sorry, Brooke, for everything, for all of it." I wanted to hold on to my anger to let her drown in the consequences of her actions. But looking at my sister, manipulated, humiliated, finally seeing herself, clearly, I felt something shift. She wasn't just the villain in my story. She was another casualty of Richard's toxic parenting raised to be decorative rather than competent. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. Maria Santos, my investigator. I stepped into the hallway to take the call. Marcus Webb is an alias, Maria said without preamble. I tracked him to 3 other similar schemes over the past 5 years. He targets daughters of successful businessmen, gains their trust, manipulates them into making catastrophic financial decisions. And Brooke, he's connected to Titanium Capital Group, the corporate raiders. This wasn't just a con for money, it was corporate espionage. They wanted to drain Howard Manufacturing's cash reserves to make it vulnerable for a hostile takeover. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Marcus hadn't just stolen $12 million. He'd strategically weakened the company to make it prey. I thanked Maria and ended the call just as I heard the front door slam. Richard's heavy footsteps echoed through the house. I found him in his study, pouring whiskey with shaking hands. I told you not to come here, he said without turning around. $25 million, I said flatly. Redstone Capital Partners. You used the company as collateral for a personal loan. His shoulders sagged. For the first time, my father looked old, defeated. He sank into his leather chair, the whiskey forgotten. It started 5 years ago, after your mother died. Just online poker at first, a way to feel something other than grief. His voice was hollow. I lost $8 million in the first 2 years. I thought I could win it back. I borrowed more. The hole just got deeper. Illegal casinos, offshore accounts. You've been hemorrhaging money for 5 years. I kept my voice cold, clinical. And when Redstone came calling you, tried to hide by transferring the company to Madison, you thought if you didn't technically own it anymore, they couldn't touch it. I thought I could protect. You thought you could escape the consequences of your own weakness? I cut him off. And in the process, you've destroyed everything. Madison's $12 million loss has crippled the cash flow. Your $25 million debt means Redstone will foreclose in 90 days. They'll auction your shares and Titanium Capital will buy them. They'll force a board change, fire management, and strip everything of value. The company I built, I stopped myself. The company will be gone. Richard's head snapped up. The company you built? I smiled coldly. Did you really think you engineered that miraculous turnaround 10 years ago, Cascade Holdings LLC father? That was me. I saved you then, and now you've gambled away my legacy. I left him sitting there stunned and walked through the house one last time. Madison was standing in the hallway, having heard everything. Please, she said, tears streaming down her face. I know I don't deserve it, but please help us. I'll do anything. But Richard's voice called after me, pride still clinging to him like armor. We don't need her charity. I'll figure it out. That night I stood alone in Howard Manufacturing's boardroom, staring at the portrait of my mother that hung on the wall. She looked back at me with those knowing eyes, the same eyes I saw in my own reflection, the only person who'd ever truly believed in me. I thought of her letter, her final gift, her wisdom about love and obligation and self-preservation. I pulled out my phone and dialed Thomas Chen. I'm ready to use the trust fund, I said. But not the way they expect. Thomas's voice was careful. What exactly do you have in mind, Miss Howard? I looked at my reflection in the dark window, and that smile from Christmas dinner returned. I'm going to save the company, I said softly, and then I'm going to take it. 2 weeks later, I walked into the Howard Manufacturing boardroom wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than my father's monthly mortgage payment. The emergency meeting I'd called had drawn every board member and major shareholder. They sat around the table looking confused, some concerned, a few openly curious about why Richard Howard's estranged daughter had summoned them here. Richard sat at the head of the table where he'd always sat, trying to project authority he no longer possessed. Madison sat beside him, looking small and nervous. She'd called me 3 times that morning, but I hadn't answered. This needed to happen exactly as I'd planned it. Thank you all for coming. I began standing at the opposite end of the table. I know this is unusual. Let me introduce myself properly. My name is Brooke Howard, and I'm the founding principal of Cascade Holdings, LLC. The room went silent. Richard's face drained of color. 10 years ago, I continued, this company was $8 million in debt and 72 hours from bankruptcy. Cascade Holdings provided $12 million in emergency capital through a structured investment agreement. I placed a document on the table. This is the contract my father signed. I'd like to draw your attention to sections 4, 7, and 12. I watched Richard's hands tremble as he recognized his own signature on pages he'd never bothered to read. Patricia Mills, a 62-year-old minority shareholder who'd been with the company for 15 years, leaned forward with sharp interest. Section 4 grants Cascade Holdings strategic decision-making rights on all major business initiatives, I explained. Section 7 provides right of first refusal on any share purchases during times of financial crisis. Section 12 grants veto power over financial decisions exceeding $1 million. I paused, letting that sink in. For 10 years, I've watched from the shadows as this company, which I rebuilt from bankruptcy, was credited to people who nearly destroyed it twice. I opened my laptop and began presenting forensic accounting evidence. The restructuring strategy that turned us profitable, the new client relationships I'd personally cultivated through my consulting network, the operational systems I'd designed and implemented through hired consultants. Every decision that had been attributed to Richard's business genius was documented as my work. I always wondered, Patricia Mills said slowly, how Richard pulled off such a sophisticated turnaround when he barely understood basic financial statements. Now I know. Richard tried to stand. This is preposterous. You can't just... Today, I continued speaking over him, I'm invoking my contractual right of first refusal. Your shares, Father, are about to be foreclosed by Redstone Capital Partners due to $25 million in unpaid gambling debts. I'm offering to purchase your 30% stake, directly preventing the auction that would hand control to Titanium Capital Group. I nodded to my attorney, and the screen behind me lit up with a video compilation. Security footage from casinos, bank records showing massive cash withdrawals, offshore wire transfers, 5 years of gambling addiction laid bare for everyone to see. Then came the documentation of Madison's $12 million loss, the Florida scam, Marcus Webb's corporate espionage connections, and the Redstone debt documents. Richard's face went from white to red. You have no right to expose. I have every right, I said, my voice cutting through his protest like steel. I'm the largest creditor this company has ever had. I've been owed $12 million plus interest for 10 years. Your debts aren't just to Redstone, Father, they're to me. The room was utterly silent. I let the weight of that statement settle before I shifted my tone, looking directly at the board members and shareholders. However, I'm not here for revenge. I'm here to honor my mother's legacy and save this company she loved. I presented my proposal clearly and methodically. I would pay Richard's $25 million debt to Redstone using funds from my mother's trust. I would purchase his 30% stake at fair market value, $25.8 million, slightly above auction value. He would receive an annual pension of $150,000 and keep the family home. Both Richard and Madison would have zero operational control going forward. Madison could retain her symbolic 20% shares, but only as a passive investor. I would assume the positions of CEO and chairman of the board immediately. The board members sat in stunned silence, processing this merciful but uncompromising resolution. Patricia Mills was the first to speak. I vote yes. Brooke has earned this 100 times over. The other votes came quickly after that. They'd rather work with someone competent than watch the company be devoured by corporate raiders. The motion passed unanimously. After the meeting adjourned, I asked Richard and Madison to stay. Madison stood and moved to my side of the table, a gesture that made Richard's jaw clench. You planned this, he said, his voice thick with humiliation and rage. You wanted to take everything from me. No, Father, I replied, my voice calm and steady. You planned this when you gambled away your company. You planned this when you made me invisible my whole life. I'm simply refusing to be invisible anymore. I continued, needing him to understand. I'm paying your debts not because you deserve it, but because Mom asked me to protect this family. She knew you were weak, she knew you'd fail, and she made sure I'd be strong enough to catch everyone when you did. She's right, Dad, Madison said quietly. She's been saving us our entire lives." Richard tried one last desperate grasp at authority. "I built this company. I placed one final document on the table, a letter in my mother's elegant handwriting dated 2 weeks before her death. Mom wanted you to have this. I've been holding it until the right moment." Richard picked it up with shaking hands and read aloud, "I know about the gambling. I know about the debts. I know you're going to destroy everything. That's why I'm leaving everything to Brooke. She's the only one strong enough to save our family from you." He collapsed into his chair, the letter falling from his fingers. For the first time in his life, my father had been forced to face the truth about who he really was, not the powerful patriarch, just the weak link. As I walked out of the boardroom, officially CEO of Howard Manufacturing, my phone buzzed with a news alert. I glanced at the screen and felt my pulse quicken. A local business reporter was requesting an interview about the Howard family drama. The story was going national. Madison hurried after me into the hallway. "What do we do?" she asked nervously. I looked at my sister, and that smile returned to my face. "We tell the truth," I said, "and we make sure every overlooked daughter in America knows she doesn't have to stay invisible." 6 months after I walked out of that boardroom as CEO, I woke up to 17 missed calls and a flooded inbox. Sarah Kim, a reporter from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, had published her feature article overnight. The headline read, "The daughter they ignored built an empire and saved them anyway." I'd agreed to the interview because I wanted the truth told, but I hadn't anticipated the response. Sarah had chronicled everything my childhood as the invisible daughter, the secret rescue of Howard Manufacturing Richard's gambling addiction, Madison's manipulation by Marcus, and my decision to save them while taking control. She'd written it with such clarity and emotional honesty that by the time I finished reading, I was crying at my own kitchen table. Within 48 hours, the article had been shared 2 million times. Good Morning America called, requesting an interview. The Today Show sent a producer. My inbox became a testament to how many women had lived some version of my story. "Your story is my story," one woman wrote. "I've been the family caretaker for 30 years, and they still treat me like I'm nothing." Another message read, "Thank you for showing us we don't have to accept being invisible. I finally left my toxic family situation after reading about you." The phrase, "unseen daughter," began appearing everywhere in blog posts, therapy sessions, women's support groups. I'd somehow given language to an experience that millions of women had endured in silence. Business organizations invited me to speak. Universities requested me for panel discussions on family dynamics and female leadership. What surprised me most was the impact on Howard Manufacturing itself. Our clients and partners responded to the transparency with increased respect and loyalty. Our stock value increased 40% as I implemented the strategies I'd envisioned for years, but never had the authority to execute. Employees who'd worked under Richard's chaotic leadership thrived under clear direction and genuine appreciation. The company I'd built in shadows was finally being built in daylight, and it was stronger for it. 9 months after taking over, I announced the creation of the Unseen Daughters Foundation with $10 million of initial funding. The mission was simple support, women over 50, who'd been overlooked, undervalued, or financially abused by family. We would provide business grants, legal aid, counseling services, and scholarships for late-blooming female entrepreneurs. Women who'd spent decades being told they were worthless would finally receive investment in their potential. The person who surprised me most was Madison. She came to my office 3 weeks after the announcement and asked if she could work for the foundation as deputy director. "Not for pay," she clarified quickly. "I need to make up for years of being blind to my privilege, and I want to help other women avoid what happened to me with Marcus." I studied my sister's face, looking for manipulation or self-interest, but found only genuine remorse and determination. "You'd be sharing your story publicly," I warned her. "People will judge you." "I deserve to be judged," she said simply, "but maybe my mistakes can help someone else." So Madison joined the foundation, and she was remarkable. She spoke at workshops about recognizing financial predators and manipulation tactics. She counseled women who'd been scammed by men who preyed on their need for validation. She worked harder than I'd ever seen her work at anything, driven by a need to become someone worthy of respect, rather than someone who'd simply been handed it. The foundation's first annual gala raised $8 million. 800 people filled the ballroom: business leaders, celebrities, and most importantly, hundreds of women who identified as unseen daughters. I saw Richard sitting alone in the back row during my speech. He didn't approach me, but I noticed him wiping his eyes when I talked about my mother's legacy. A week later, I received a handwritten letter from him. His penmanship was shaky, uncertain. "I spent 38 years being blind," he wrote. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know I finally see you, and I'm sorry I wasted the chance to know the most remarkable person I ever met, my daughter." I kept the letter. I didn't respond immediately, but I kept it. Healing doesn't require forgiveness on anyone's timeline but your own. 18 months after that Christmas dinner, I stood on a stage in a grand ballroom holding 2 awards: Executive of the Year from the Atlanta Business Journal and Woman of the Year from the Georgia Women's Leadership Council. Madison sat in the front row, genuinely proud. Richard sat in the back, a humbled shadow of the man who'd once called me useless. My Aunt Carol dabbed tears with a handkerchief, whispering to anyone who'd listen that Eleanor would be so proud. I looked out at 800 faces looking back at me, really seeing me, and began my speech. For 38 years, I thought being unseen meant I was worthless. I thought silence meant weakness. I was wrong. My voice grew stronger. Every woman who has been overlooked, dismissed, or underestimated, you're not invisible. You're gathering strength, and when you finally step into your power, the world will have no choice but to see you. The ballroom erupted in standing ovation. Women I'd never met were crying, holding each other, finding recognition in my words. I looked up toward the ceiling as if I could see through it to wherever my mother was. "I hope you can see this, Mom," I whispered. At that exact moment, a beam of late afternoon sunlight broke through the tall windows, illuminating the stage in golden light. The photographer captured it perfectly, me bathed in that light, holding my award, surrounded by 800 people finally seeing me. 1 week later, I stood in my corner office at Howard Manufacturing, completely redesigned to reflect my vision. On my desk sat my mother's photograph, my awards, and Richard's letter. I looked out at the Atlanta skyline, the city stretching before me, full of possibility. Madison knocked and entered. "Ready for the board meeting, boss?" I smiled, not the mysterious smile from Christmas dinner, but something genuine and peaceful. "Ready." As we walked down the hall together, employees nodded respectfully. Some smiled, a few stopped to ask questions or share updates. I was no longer invisible. I was finally completely triumphantly seen, and I had built it all myself. If Brooke's story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Have you been the one who gave everything and received nothing in return? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience matters, and you never know who might need to hear that they're not alone. If this story inspired you or made you think differently about family dynamics and personal power, please subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss another story about courage, justice, and women who refuse to stay invisible. Thank you for listening to Brooke's Journey. Remember, being overlooked doesn't mean you're worthless. It often means you're gathering the strength to become unstoppable.